Usually when you read a really massive world-altering manifesto, there's this expectation, right?
Oh, absolutely. You expect a massive climax.
Yeah, exactly. You expect a climax that actually matches the buildup. I mean, you're reading this grand strategy with empires clashing and revolutions brewing, and
And you expect the final chapter to be the ultimate battle cry.
it should feel like the moment right before a massive civilizational shift.
You want that crescendo. You expect the strategic masterpiece to end on a note that just shakes the earth, something that galvanizes the movement for generations.
But then you actually get to the end of Surah Ta-Ha.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the standard traditional Sunday school interpretation,
Oh, man.
suddenly that earth-shattering crescendo just turns into, like, a polite cough.
A polite cough is a generous way to put it.
I mean, it's like watching a 3-hour epic about the fall of the Roman Empire, and the final scene is literally just a guy reminding you to brush your teeth and go to bed on time. It just feels incredibly disjointed.
It is the absolute definition of an anticlimax. And frankly, it's a total collapse of the narrative tension that the text has been so meticulously building for 13 previous lectures.
And that profound disconnect is exactly where we find ourselves today. So welcome back to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for the finale.
And to you, listening right now, you are the vital third mind in the room with us today. We are finally reaching the culmination of this incredible intellectual endeavor.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. Today we are unpacking a fascinating stack of translations, historical critiques, and sociological analyses. We're specifically drawing from the archival excavations of the Tolu Islam Digital Audio Project to decode Lecture 14 of 14 on Surah Ta-Ha.
It is a monumental point in the text. I mean, just to set the stage properly here, we are at the absolute apex of a massive strategic blueprint.
Right.
We have literally spent hours analyzing how this newly liberated movement escaped tyranny, how they navigated the psychological pitfalls of their own ranks, and now
they are about to receive their final marching orders from the chief strategist.
Exactly. But if you look at the passive, moralizing conclusion that is usually taught from standard pulpits, it's just, well, it's baffling.
Oh, it sounds something like this, right? So God tells the prophet to ignore rich people, make sure his family prays their 5 daily prayers so God can give them food, and tells the disbelievers that they will find out who is right on Judgment Day, when everyone gets sent to heaven or hell.
I just have to stop you right there. We need to completely shatter that reading right out of the gate.
I figured you'd say that.
I mean, calling that an oversimplification is a tragic understatement. That interpretation is just a passive placeholder.
A placeholder.
Yes, it completely dilutes a massive, high-stakes strategic manifesto down to mere domestic chores and, frankly, superstitious waiting.
Right, it completely strips the text of its teeth.
Exactly. It strips its socio-political teeth, turning a brilliant blueprint for civilizational reform into, like, a checklist for a pious household.
Okay, well, I have to play skeptic here for a second, because I genuinely want to understand how centuries of standard interpretation arrived at remind the kids to do their rituals, and how you are proposing we completely reframe this grand finale.
Is a fair question.
Because you're suggesting a radical departure from the norm here.
We reframe it by looking at the raw language of societal mechanics. I mean, this isn't a sermon, right? It's the ultimate strategic directive.
Okay, so what is the actual directive then?
The instruction being given to this newly liberated movement isn't about domestic maintenance at all. The directive is a very stern warning and a command. It says, do not get blinded by the sparkling consumerism, what the text calls Zafrat al-Hayat, of the decaying empires around you.
Zafrat al-Hayat, the splendor of the worldly life.
Exactly. Instead of coveting that, you need to weaponize your society by locking your entire population into a disciplined, balanced economic matrix. And that matrix is a Salat.
Wow, okay.
A matrix strictly focused on universal sustenance. It is about building a parallel societal structure that can actually outlast the corrupt systems surrounding it.
That is just a massive paradigm shift. You're telling me we're looking at a macroeconomic grid, not a checklist for the family living room.
That's exactly what the sources are arguing, yes.
I want to dig really deeply into the linguistics of this, because the sources point us directly to Ayat 132, which is traditionally translated as, order your family to pray.
Right, that's the standard translation you see everywhere.
Honestly, I have always struggled with the sheer absurdity of God delivering a world-shaking civilizational blueprint, tearing down the tyrannical empire of Pharaoh, mapping out the vulnerabilities of Sumeria's golden calf, only to end the whole thing with, hey, make sure your blood relatives are keeping up with their daily rituals.
It feels incredibly small, doesn't it?
It feels like a total letdown.
And it feels small because that translation projects a modern nuclear family concept onto an ancient sociopolitical term.
Okay, unpack that for me.
When we look at the Arabic word al, which is usually translated as family, we really have to look at how it operates in the Quranic sociopolitical framework.
Right.
In this specific strategic context, al does not mean blood relatives. It means the collective societal family.
The societal family.
Yes, it refers to the ideological vanguard, the group of people who are fundamentally united by the revolutionary mission.
Wait, hold on. Thousands of years of scholarship translate that word as biological family. You can't just, change the definition to fit a revolutionary vanguard framing just because it sounds more exciting.
No, of course not.
So where is the actual textual proof that all supersedes biological DNA?
That is a crucial pushback, but the evidence doesn't come from a modern dictionary. It comes directly from the source text's own historical case studies.
Okay, let's hear them.
Let's look at the story of Noah. The text provides a very clear, highly emotional interaction between Noah and the divine.
Right, during the flood.
Exactly. Noah is watching the corrupt system literally drown, and his biological son is caught in the collapse. So Noah pleads for him, and he explicitly refers to his son as his all, his family.
And God's response is incredibly precise there, isn't it?
It is. God explicitly tells Noah that his biological son is not his family. The Arabic is innahu laysa min alika. He is not of your all.
Wow, he is not your family.
Right. And why? The text immediately provides the reason. It says, because his deeds, his ideology, his worldview are not aligned. His work was other than righteous.
So the divine decree literally severs the biological tie in favor of the ideological one.
Exactly. Your family isn't who you share genetics with. Your family is who shares the burden of the mission.
That is fascinating. The text redefines the term itself using its own internal logic.
Yes, and the sources point out we see the exact same pattern with the prophet Lot.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the sources. Lot is leading a reform movement in a deeply corrupt, exploitative city. And when the time comes to evacuate the vanguard before the city's systemic collapse, Lot's wife is explicitly excluded from us all.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Why? Because her allegiances lay with the corrupt system of the city, not with the reforming vanguard.
Oh, wow.
So when the chief strategist says in Surah Ta-Ha, establish your all upon this system, he is absolutely not talking to a father figure about his biological children.
Right, that would be totally out of context.
He's talking to the leader of a movement, telling him to organize the collective vanguard. He's talking to the people who have signed up for this societal transformation.
Okay, that foundational shift makes total sense. If I try to put that in like a modern context, imagine you're building a highly disruptive startup.
Okay, I like this.
You're trying to dismantle a massive corrupt monopoly. Your family in that trench warfare isn't necessarily your biological cousin who thinks you're crazy and happily works for the monopoly.
Right. Definitely not.
Your family is your core team, the people pulling all-nighters with you, the vanguard who actually shares your vision and is willing to bleed for it.
A very apt parallel, honestly. Now, let's look at what this startup team, this vanguard, is actually supposed to be doing.
Right, the directive itself.
The traditional reading says, order them to pray. We need to critically reevaluate the term salat here.
Okay.
In this strategic context, salat is not a mere physical ritual performed in isolation. It is the operational, equitable, economic grid of the society.
Again, let me play the skeptic for a minute. Prayer is prayer, right? People go to a designated space, they perform movements, they connect with the divine. How are the sources justifying the leap from a personal spiritual ritual to a literal macroeconomic grid?
By looking at the literal root meaning of the word itself and how it functions systemically.
Okay, break down the root for me.
The root of salat involves remaining straight, maintaining balance, and following closely without deviating.
Standing straight and balanced.
Right. So in a societal application, how does a civilization actually stand straight?
Well, I guess by not collapsing under inequality.
Exactly. It stands straight by ensuring its people aren't bent over by the crushing weight of poverty or oppression. Salat is the system of universal sustenance.
Wow, so it's a structural concept.
It is the infrastructure where resources are distributed equitably so that every single member of the vanguard can remain steadfast.
So it's the public societal infrastructure. It's the economic engine.
Exactly. And the text proves this by immediately addressing the motive of personal wealth.
Right, right.
The very next phrase in the verse says, "We do not ask you for provision, we provide for you."
Meaning the system itself shouldn't be extractive.
Exactly. The divine system doesn't operate like a tyrant. It doesn't need to extract wealth from the population just to enrich a ruling class. The system is designed to provide for the collective. The vanguard's job is to establish and maintain this distributive grid.
Which naturally bridges into the next critical phrase in Ayat 132, the phrase, Rizq Rabbika Khairun wa Abqa.
Yes, a very famous phrase.
This is usually translated as, the provision of your Lord is better and more lasting. But, I mean, if we're viewing this through the lens of societal mechanics and macroeconomics, what does better and more lasting actually mean in reality?
It points directly to structural sustainability. Rizq Rabbika refers to a system of provision and economy that is fundamentally anchored to natural, universal laws of equity.
So it's not just a spiritual platitude.
Not at all. The text isn't just making a spiritual claim, it's stating an observable reality. It's saying an egalitarian economy where resources circulate and nourish the entire social body is systemically superior. That's the Chiron part.
Systemically superior.
And structurally far more sustainable. That's the Abka part. It's mathematically superior to the alternatives.
You know, if I look at that translation, better and more lasting, my brain immediately goes to financial portfolios and, like, investment strategies.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Think about the corrupt, hyper-concentrated wealth pyramids, the empires, surrounding this newly liberated society. From a structural standpoint, they operate exactly like a get-rich-quick Ponzi scheme.
That is exactly what they are.
A very small group of people at the top gets unimaginably wealthy by constantly extracting value from the massive base below them.
And like all Ponzi schemes, it requires endless extraction to stay afloat.
Exactly. It looks incredibly glamorous for a while. If you're standing on the outside looking at the payouts at the top, the returns seem insane.
The Zafrat al-Hayat, the splendor.
Yes. But structurally, mechanically, it requires constant exploitation. It requires conquering new lands, enslaving more people, finding new ways to squeeze the bottom tier.
And eventually.
Eventually, you run out of fuel. The base collapses under its own weight. It's basically doomed from the start.
It has absolutely no longevity. It is the exact antithesis of Abka.
Right. But the Rizq Rabbika, this equitable economic grid of Salat we're talking about, is like a highly diversified long-term index fund.
I love that analogy.
It might not give you flashy overnight billionaire status. You don't get the golden palaces right away, but it's grounded in fundamental value.
Exactly. Because every part of the economy is nourished, so a compound grows steadily over time.
It can weather storms, famines, and conflicts. It is structurally sound. It is fundamentally better, and it is more lasting. It's literally designed to survive the centuries, not just the next fiscal quarter.
That is a phenomenal way to understand Khairun wa Abqa. The divine system demands an economy that mirrors the sustainability of nature itself.
Which nature is incredibly efficient at doing.
Right. When you hoard wealth, when you build that societal Ponzi scheme, you create systemic rot. You create poverty, you create resentment, crime, and ultimately you fund your own violent overthrow.
The underclass is always going to eventually revolt.
They have to. An egalitarian system diffuses that tension before it builds. It is the only structural model that ensures the long-term survival of a civilization.
Okay, I hear you. But knowing that intellectually and living it daily are two entirely different things, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
And the source text dives incredibly deep into the psychological toll this actually takes on the movement. We really have to talk about revolutionary fatigue here.
It's a very real phenomenon.
Because if you are the oppressed class and you are out there doing the grueling work of building this balanced, long-term index fund of a society, I mean, it is exhausting.
It's back-breaking work.
You are constantly rationing, you're struggling, you're building an infrastructure completely from scratch in the middle of the desert. And then you look across the border, or honestly, even just across the street, at the corrupt elite.
And what do you see when you look at them?
You see absolute splendor. You see them living in luxury, completely comfortable, flaunting all their wealth. And the immediate, very human, very raw question that bubbles up is, why them?
Right. If we're right, why are they rich?
Exactly. If we're the ones building the right system, the superior system, why do the corrupt elites get to enjoy all the wealth, power, and comfort right now?
It is a profound vulnerability in any ideological movement. And the text addresses it head-on. It introduces this concept of Zafrat al-Hayat, which roughly translates to the splendor, the glitter, or the blossoming of the worldly life.
The glitter of the worldly life.
Yeah, and the text explicitly warns the revolutionary leader, and by extension, the entire vanguard, not to gaze longingly at the opponent's wealth. It says, "Do not extend your eyes toward what we have given them to enjoy."
Because the moment you start coveting the payouts of the Ponzi scheme, you lose the discipline required to maintain your index fund.
Exactly. You start wanting shortcuts.
But the text doesn't just say, don't be jealous, does it?
No, that would be mere moralizing. It explains the mechanics of that wealth. It explains why this wealth exists in that concentrated form among the corrupt.
Okay, so what are the mechanics?
It describes that concentrated wealth as a fitna.
Now, fitna is usually translated as a test or a trial, right?
Yes, but we really need to understand fitna mechanically, not just theologically. It isn't a school exam. It's a destructive force.
A destructive force.
Historically, the root of fitna refers to the actual process of melting down gold or silver in a crucible to separate the impurities.
Oh, wow. So it implies extreme heat.
Exactly. It's a trial by intense, destructive heat. When the Quran says this concentrated wealth is a fitna for them, it's analyzing the mechanics of their own self-destruction.
That is wild.
In a deeply unequal society, hyper-concentrated wealth doesn't just sit in a vault, right? It actively breeds tyranny. It breeds arrogance, oppression, and an utter disconnect from the reality of the suffering underclass.
Okay, let me try a different analogy here to really understand the mechanics of this fitna.
Yeah.
It's almost like overpressurizing a boiler.
Okay, let's hear it.
Concentrated wealth essentially seals off the valves of social mobility. The elite hoard all the resources, sealing the system totally tight, while simultaneously turning up the heat of inequality and desperation at the bottom.
Right, they keep squeezing the bottom.
And the resulting explosion, the violent revolution, the societal collapse, isn't some magical punishment falling from the sky. It's just basic social thermodynamics. The boiler has to burst.
That perfectly captures the causality. Their wealth becomes the very fuel that overheats their own boiler.
Right.
They use those hoarded resources to build instruments of oppression. They build armies, propaganda networks, physical barriers. And this radicalizes the underclass, which inevitably leads to a chaotic rupture that tears the whole pyramid down.
Like the French Revolution.
Exactly like the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Or the collapse of literally any major historically extractive empire. So when the text says, "Do not strain your eyes toward their wealth," it's essentially saying, do not envy the man who is hoarding the fuel for the fire that is about to burn his own house down.
Wow. Do not envy the man hoarding the fuel for his own destruction. That completely flips the perspective.
It really does.
And the source makes a really crucial point here about how we actually define provision. Having a massive accumulation of money isn't the same as having true provision.
Absolutely not.
I mean, a cartel boss has stacks of cash, right? A corrupt oligarch has super yachts. But true provision risk waiver isn't just a large, isolated bank balance.
No, it's systemic health.
Right. It's having resources that are balanced, lawful, secure, and that contribute to the collective good without turning up the heat on the societal boiler.
Which forces the listener to evaluate how they actually measure success. The corrupt system measures success by the sheer volume of concentrated accumulation. The more you hoard, the more successful you are.
Which is how we measure it today, unfortunately.
Exactly. But the divine system measures success by stability, equity, and longevity. The fitna of consumerism, the Zafrat al-Hayat, is the ultimate psychological trap because its glittering surface convinces you that immediate volume is somehow more important than long-term stability.
Okay, so if the corrupt guys have all the money and the vanguard has to endure the intense heat and exhaustion of building this equitable grid, human nature is inevitably going to kick in.
Oh, it always does.
People don't like waiting. We want immediate validation, which brings us right into Ayat 133. The people demand a shortcut.
Yes. The demand for the spectacular.
The critics of the newly liberated movement, and probably even some exhausted members within it, demand a proof. They say, why doesn't he bring us a magical physical miracle from his Lord?
It's such a predictable response.
I mean, honestly, if I'm in that society, exhausted from rationing, I might want a burning bush too. I want proof that this index fund is actually backed by something real.
It is the eternal, historically consistent human demand for the supernatural. We always want a shortcut.
We have this bizarre, deeply ingrained obsession with wanting our leaders to be magicians. We don't want to do the slow, grueling intellectual work of analyzing a societal blueprint or balancing a tax grid.
No, that's too much like hard work.
We just want a guy to wave a staff, pull a rabbit out of a hat, or part a sea on demand to prove he has ultimate authority. It's the tyranny of unproven assertions. We crave a supernatural spectacle because it overrides our need to actually think critically.
And what is profoundly revealing here is how the Quran handles that demand. It completely ruthlessly shuts it down.
So it doesn't give them a miracle.
It does not indulge the desire for a magic trick at all. It doesn't say, okay, here is a flaming chariot in the sky to prove my point. It points straight back to empirical data.
Empirical data.
Yes. The text responds, has there not come to them clear evidence, Baina, in the past records?
Wait, it literally tells them, go read a history book.
That is exactly what it's saying. It is astounding.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It is a monumental shift from mysticism to empiricism. The text is declaring that the era of relying on magical miracles is completely over.
Wow.
The true miracle isn't a suspension of natural law. It's the unalterable empirical law of history showing how corrupt systems systematically destroy themselves while balanced societies flourish. The divine system demands the use of your intellect, not the suspension of it.
We really need to pause and explore this because the source material goes on a very sharp, very pointed critique of blind traditionalism and mysticism.
It certainly does.
It specifically calls out how civilizations decay when they abandon empirical reasoning in favor of magical thinking. And it brings up specific historical figures to prove this point.
Yes, the sources provide a brilliant autopsy of intellectual decay, specifically pointing to figures like Imam al-Ghazali.
Oh, wow, okay. That is a massive name to critique.
Right. I mean, al-Ghazali is a towering, deeply respected figure in traditional Islamic philosophy. But the source text analyzes his trajectory to show exactly how a civilization loses its way.
Okay, walk me through that.
So al-Ghazali spent the first half of his life mastering philosophy, logic, and reason. He was brilliant. But eventually, he experienced a profound crisis and spent the second half of his life writing works like The Incoherence of the Philosophers.
So he turned against his own rational roots.
Exactly. He actively tried to dismantle the civilization's reliance on intellect, pushing the culture towards Sufism, mysticism, and prioritizing inner states of feeling over objective, empirical reasoning.
I mean, why would a society even do that? Why do human beings naturally prefer to abandon reason for mysticism? It has to be some sort of psychological comfort mechanism, right?
Absolutely. It is the comfort of abdicating responsibility.
Abdicating responsibility.
Think about it. If you acknowledge that societal success depends on empirical reasoning, macroeconomics, and structural justice, then you have to do the work.
Right. You actually have to build the grid.
You have to study, you have to legislate, you have to enforce equity. It's hard.
Hmm.
But if you can convince yourself that a mystic or a saint can fix the economy by performing a miracle or uttering a specific chant, well, you are off the hook. You can just sit at a shrine and wait.
It's intellectual outsourcing.
That is exactly what it is.
The source argues that this pivot from analyzing the clear evidence of history to looking for saints who can perform magic tricks is the exact mechanism of civilizational suicide. When you stop looking at the data of past records and start waiting for a supernatural intervention, your strategy engine just dies. You lose the capacity to govern, to innovate, to build that equitable economic grid we talked about earlier.
Precisely. If you believe magic governs the world, you will never put in the rigorous, disciplined work required to design a fair distribution of resources.
It's just inherently lazy.
The Quran is telling this vanguard in Ayat 133. The Bayina, the clear proof, is the historical data of what happens to oppressive regimes. Analyze it. Learn from it. Apply your reason. Do not wait for a magic wand.
So the divine expectation is for you to be a critical thinker. You are expected to be an active analytical participant in the laboratory of society. You are not meant to be a passive spectator waiting for a magic show.
Exactly.
But that leads to a very natural, very difficult pushback. Let me play devil's advocate again here.
Go for it.
Let's say I agree with you. I analyze the historical data, and I see that corrupt systems, these overpressurized boilers, eventually destroy themselves. But I also see that it sometimes takes a really, really long time.
Yes, it does.
Decades, sometimes centuries.
Systemic collapse is rarely an overnight phenomenon.
So if the underlying math of this social physics is so absolute, why the delay? If a society is fundamentally corrupt and oppressive, why doesn't the system just crash immediately?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Why do the tyrants get to live out their lives in absolute splendor while the oppressed suffer for generations? Instant justice seems vastly more just than delayed justice.
That is the core existential dilemma of literally anyone fighting for reform, and it brings us to one of the most profound concepts in the entire text. It's addressed in Ayat 134, the law of respite.
The law of respite.
We have to understand that in this framework, consequences do not manifest as arbitrary instant lightning bolts. They operate through empirical cause and effect.
But again, why? If the system is rigged to fail, why let the tape run so long?
Because we are dealing with a universe governed by free will, reason, and empirical proof. The law of respite dictates that societies must be given sufficient time to see the consequences of their actions manifest naturally.
Okay, give me an analogy here to ground this.
Think about it like a rigorous scientific experiment. Imagine you are a toxicologist and you are running an experiment to prove that a certain industrial chemical is lethal to an ecosystem.
Okay, I'm with you.
You introduce the chemical. Now, if you intervene and stop the experiment 5 seconds later, before any symptoms appear, before the plants wither, the water turns toxic, and you just declare, see, it's toxic, experiment over.
Right.
The manufacturers of that chemical would rightly argue against you. They would say, you didn't prove anything, the ecosystem looked fine, you intervened before the results were clear, it was a perfectly safe chemical.
Ah, I see. You had to have a control group. The tape has to run out. You literally have to let the toxicity visibly manifest.
Exactly. If corrupt societies were destroyed instantly, without warning, or without the time to fully enact their policies and see the blowback, the empirical proof would be totally void.
They would just claim victimhood.
They would complain. And the text literally quotes what their complaint would be. Our Lord, why did you not send us a messenger so we could follow your verses before we were humiliated and disgraced?
Oh, wow. They'd use the interruption as an excuse.
True justice requires a period of manifestation. It requires the systemic rot to become undeniable to everyone observing. The elite must be given the rope to hang themselves, systemically speaking.
So that when the collapse happens, it's undeniable.
Right. It is an undeniable mathematical result of their own actions, not some arbitrary intervention from the sky.
It's the ultimate control group in the experiment of human free will. You have to let them run their Ponzi scheme until the math spectacularly fails. Otherwise, they and everyone watching will always claim the math would have worked if you hadn't interrupted them.
Exactly.
The boiler just has to be allowed to explode under its own pressure.
Which brings us, finally, to the absolute mic drop finale of the surah, Ayat 135, the culmination of everything we've discussed today.
Let's dissect this ending. Because after all this high-level sociology and economics, Ayat 135 simply says, say, everyone is waiting, so wait. Then you will know who are the companions of the sound path and who is guided.
It's a powerful verse.
But I mean, reading that through the standard lens, it just sounds petty. It sounds like an emotional threat. Like a kid on a playground saying, oh yeah, well just, you wait until Judgment Day, then you'll see who's laughing. It sounds incredibly petulant.
It does sound petulant if you read it as mere mythology or a supernatural threat. But when you translate this into the raw, structural language we've been using, it is a cold scientific challenge.
A scientific challenge?
Yes, it is the ultimate statement of confidence in an empirical law.
Break that down for me. How is just wait a scientific challenge?
Think about the massive scope of the journey we've just taken through Surah Ta-Ha. We've analyzed Moses and Pharaoh. We've dissected Samiri and Aaron.
Right.
These aren't just characters in a story. They are archetypes who have run their ideological experiments in the laboratory of human society.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Pharaoh ran the experiment of tyranny, exploitation, and hyper-concentrated wealth. Samiri ran the experiment of psychological manipulation, fiat currency, and hollow consumer aesthetics. Moses brought the blueprint for balance, universal sustenance, and reason.
Right.
The surah has explicitly laid out the variables, the constants, and the inevitable outcomes of these structural choices.
So when the text says everyone is waiting, so wait. It's not a threat of magical hellfire. It's literally an observation of an ongoing macro-level societal experiment.
Exactly. It is saying, history is going to let the tape run. The law of requital, the absolute law of cause and effect, will dictate the outcome.
It's just physics.
Yes. You will eventually see, with absolute empirical certainty, who built on the level, balanced path what the text calls a shab al-sira al-saway. It's not about waiting for an unseen afterlife to resolve things in some ethereal realm.
It's about reality.
It's about waiting for the systemic certainty of societal collapse or civilizational success to manifest in the real world, in real time, right in front of your eyes.
It's basically the ultimate intellectual flex. It's saying, the math is the math. You've built a fundamentally unstable structure based on extraction and greed. I'm building a structurally sound one based on equity. We don't need to argue anymore. Let's just step back and watch gravity do its work.
Gravity is the perfect word for it.
That is so incredibly powerful. It completely shifts the posture of the listener. You go from someone who is anxiously defending their faith, stressed about the wealth of the corrupt, to someone who is calmly, methodically observing the laws of physics play out.
It provides the ultimate intellectual confidence. You don't need to panic when you see the empires glowing with wealth. You just need to build your equitable grid, maintain your salat, avoid the psychological distraction of their fitna, and wait. History is the judge, and the verdict is structurally inevitable.
I'm stepping back to look at the whole picture. And if you are vital third mind listening right now, take a moment to reflect on the jaw-dropping intellectual journey we've been on through all 14 lectures of Surah Ta-Ha. I mean, it is staggering.
It really is a masterclass in strategy.
Think about where we started. We began by taking the mystical story of the burning bush and dismantling it, revealing it as a profound moment of psychological awakening and taking on immense responsibility.
Right.
We analyzed the macroeconomics of Samiri's golden calf, revealing it not as a story about a magical statue, but as a razor-sharp critique of fiat currency, hollow consumerism, and the manipulation of the masses.
Which is more relevant today than ever.
Absolutely. And now we've arrived at this final chilling historical showdown where the universe basically folds its arms and says, run the simulation, let the structurally superior system survive.
We have completely deconstructed the social physics of Surah Ta-Ha. The blueprint is in our hands. But our archival excavation of the human civilizational project doesn't stop here. What happens when this newly balanced society faces the ultimate test of global international relations, systemic defense, and the deep psychological anxieties of human existence? In the very next phase of our archive, as we open our very first lecture of Surah Al-Anbiya, we're going to explore the collective awakening of humanity's rational prophets as they confront a world on the brink of structural amnesia. Stay tuned because the strategy engine is just getting warmed up.
The strategy engine is just getting warmed up. I love that. And before we close out this incredible chapter, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Always a good idea.
If the ultimate empirical proof of a society's truth isn't magic, but rather its historical survival and its economic balance, what does the current state of our modern, hyper-consumerist global empires predict for our own immediate future?
A very sobering question.
When you look around at the extreme wealth concentration sealing the valves of social mobility, the desperate obsession with quick fixes over rigorous rational work, the constant exhausting fitna of modern life turning up the heat on the boiler, are we currently running an experiment where the tape is about to run out? Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep your eyes on the math. We'll see you in the next deep dive.